Szymon, please.
Perfect. Yes, can you guys hear me okay?
No.
Yeah?
No.
No. Please turn the microphone.
It's green now, so should be working fine. Maybe I should be speaking to my
Now it's better.
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much for having me here. I know that we're kind of reaching the end of today, so I'll try to be on the point and I'll try to stick to the topic and go through it quickly. So, as you can see on the slides, we're going to be talking about software development and how to do it on time and within the budget. Many people say that it's impossible. We shall see how me and my organization goes about the problem. So, who am I? My name is Szymon Kikla. Thank you for introduction. I'm coming to you from London, where I spent the last 10 years, probably 8 years working on a number of different software development projects. Right now, I still run some projects as a technical project manager, and I manage a small team of about six other guys. I work for a company called Comcast. We are a large American organization that provides services for media industry, for entertainment, telecom as well. I, however, work for Comcast Technology Solutions, and our role is to develop software for Comcast internally, but also for other clients in the media sector mainly. So, what do I bring in terms of experience into this talk? Here's my background. I've been focusing and managing software development projects for the last 8 to 6 years. This means writing software from scratch, but also implementing software, integrating software with larger ecosystems of other vendors. My past experience has been around cloud developments, on-prem as well, web mobile, not only media industry, but also financial services, pharma, tech, all those different industries. They've got slightly different needs, and developing for those industries is always going to work slightly differently. I had a period in a startup for about 3 years, worked quite okay, and so I've recently started consulting to a startup as well, trying to help them to understand how they should go about developing software to make sure that in the end of the project you will be able to make some money on it. It's very important, as we all know. So, in terms of my contact details, should any of you be interested in speaking to me afterwards, absolutely yes, please feel free to contact me. This slide is not going to be here for a long time. I realize it might be difficult for you to take the notes, so by all means, let's meet later, and I'll be more than happy to catch up on whatever topics you would want to discuss. The reason I think there is something I can tell you about delivering projects is because of the performance of my team. So within the last 12 months, we've managed to deliver all the projects on budget, which means that we haven't lost money, which wasn't the case before our 12 months remit that we've calculated. And what I mean by staying within the budget is really kind of concept of you giving your clients a statement of work. You're telling your client that you're going to charge them £100,000, let's say, and you're going to spend about 3,600 hours on that project, right? If you're going to spend more, that means you're going to lose the money. So we've been delivering the projects within the time frame that we set up for our clients. In terms of timing, we didn't do that badly, but it's not perfect. So 87% of the cases were when we delivered something by December, if we said it's going to be December. 13%, sometimes it was other vendors who were late. Sometimes the client came to you and say, hey, I want to change something in the scope. So we had to take a step back and keep working on it. But sometimes it was also our performance, which wasn't to the point that it wasn't as good as it should be. So there's always a room for you to implement better practices for you to run your projects. Now, what I mean by project is an engagement that lasts between 12 months and 3 years. My company builds backends for the likes of Netflix, right? So if you've got the Netflix, your online video platform, we provide you with the backend which you can set up and use to plug into your mobile devices, web environments, home entertainment systems like set-top boxes, etc., etc. That's what we do. In order to build something like this from scratch for a company, say Vodafone, which is one of the projects that we were recently working on, you need about 12 months at least, and then later you can start iterating and start building something interesting. So this is what I'm going to be bringing in this presentation. I'll tell you a bit more about how this online video platform would work. That's the context of the presentation, but I'm sure you can apply some of the practices to other areas of the business. So the agenda for another 30 minutes is going to be a bit about theory, the principles and methodologies that my team uses to run the project. My team means me as a project manager, solution architect, 2 integrators, QA and test guy. I'm going to be telling you a bit more about the practical application of the theory and how we iterate our practices just to make sure that we are going to be changing as the market changes, and we're going to stick to the change rather than just keep doing all the things in the same fashion, which is not something that we wanted to do. My approach for the presentation is going to be to focus about the benefits of doing certain things, but I'm also going to be very open and honest about the challenges. We don't do everything perfectly, and sometimes we also make mistakes. And finally, software development is the context of the presentation, but I'm also talking about mainly the external clients. So I don't work on the projects for internal teams, but I work for the clients, and I'm going to be telling you how you manage the client relationship to make sure you get everything on time and you can then produce something valuable on time as well. So let's start by thinking, how do we develop nowadays? Well, it's 2017, so I'm sure everyone is going to tell you, oh, Agile, we're just going to do Agile, we're going to do Scrum, we're going to do Kanban, we're going to do extreme programming, whatever you're going to use. No one is going to tell you, oh, I'm following the waterfall pattern where I move from A to B to C to D, etc. Now, I've been thinking about this for quite some time, and I thought, do I really do Agile all the time? Do I really need to, have everything in sprints? Is this how that should work? And I thought about the time when I need to set up a new online video instance. And in order to set up new online video instance, I would need storage, I would need my web environment, say Google platform, AWS, right, where I execute my applications. I would need content delivery network, and I would need some sort of a front end, right? So I've got those 5 elements that I need. If I need those, that means I've already done this, and that means I know how to set that up, right? Is this going to be Agile? I don't think so. I think that you can stick to your waterfall to build the account baseline, right? So you know what you need to then be able to start thinking about new features and start developing. And if you know what you need to do in the first place, let's stick to your waterfall, go through your steps from A to D or later, and if you know the sequence of the events, that means that you can automate, right? So if you've got a situation where you know that I'm going to be starting, and in order for me to start thinking about the new features, I need to prepare some infrastructure for myself, you can definitely automate many steps in between. To give you the example, we've got a new client, and the new client wants to have their own online distribution method for the video, and rather than us asking them, hey, do you want to use Akamai as your CDN? Yes, please. They provide you the credentials, you configure it, you go back, you ask more questions, and so on and so forth. What we're doing now is we're giving them the form, and the form is going to ask them about all the configuration details. They're going to fill the form, they submit the form goes through the script, and the script pre-populates the account baseline setup, right? So I already have something where I can throw my video and I can get it on my website, I can get it on my mobile application. So you save time, and in this case we actually saved, thinking about the time frame, about a week's of work, right? Because you can automate that stuff. Now the other thing is, if you know what you're doing, you can templatize it, and what I mean by this is you can put together a documentation, and you can give that documentation to someone else who's not as clever as you are, and you can focus on building some important features that really requires your knowledge, right? So we can templatize things, we can automate things, and stuff is just going to work much easier. You've already saved 2 weeks of your time, and you're going to have extra time for fixing the bugs in the end. Tool set, just to put the context here, that's what I do. That's what I use for my project. So everything is run in Jira. How many of you use Jira? Quite a few, right? So that's good. I'm going to be talking about Jira workflows. We document everything in Confluence. We run our applications in Google Cloud Platform, sometimes for the client, AWS. Everything sits in GitHub and Git, so this is where we keep all the wraps of the codes, and we communicate and constantly communicate over Slack with the client as well. Now, as I'm sure you know, you can plug all those apps together and you've got a nice ecosystem, everything happens automatically there, so again, you're saving time. A few dogmas that we've tried to follow quite rigidly, right? So first, test-driven development. I believe there was a talk before about that topic, so I'm not going to go into details. For those of you who may not be familiar with the concept, basically this changes the way you start writing your code. Rather than you code in the first place and then test it, you prepare the test case, and then you try to write your code so that the test can be passed, right? That's driven development. And in London, I would say this is becoming a common practice, right? So you don't do the linear kind of coding anymore. It is really about test-driven development. There's a new concept called behavior-driven development. It's kind of all about the same thing. You want to think what the code should do before you start building the codes. Another dogma that we follow is around releases. We release our software very, very often. If we run our sprint cycle on 2 weeks basis, every 2 weeks there's going to be a new release of the software. It might be modular, it might be something that the end user is not going to kind of see in terms of the behavior of the platform. It might be refactoring, where you clean up your codes, but you go ahead and release your codes very frequently. The method for us to do it is that we deploy it into production, and we let it soak in production for about 1 week, right? So we deploy, but it's in the shadow mode, which means the code is not active. What we want to do is we want to see how this code is going to impact other areas of the platform, right? We've all dealt with bugs. Bugs are a pain in the ass, and for us, one of the methods to avoid these kind of situations is by having the codes soaked, and then once we know that everything is fine, week 3 we activate. So to give you the example, week 1 I code and I finish my codes. I put it into production in week 2. In week 3 I enable the codes and see how things work. That works pretty well. Iteration and retrospectives. Iterations, that's part of an Agile. So we do expect the client to take our codes, go to the markets, test it, come back to us and say, hey, actually, we want those buttons to be there rather than here because no one can find it. Right? You can only get it right if you do the retrospectives after every sprint. And people don't like it. So my development team, they're not really very fond of it. Now, I try to push them, and we sit down for a short period of time, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, but we go through the things that went well and things that we should improve and things that were the blockers, and we couldn't really address something because it was blocked by, say, the client. So it's very important to have this on your radar. Don't underestimate that. Try to stick to that plan. So with those Agile principles in mind, we can now start moving into our projects, and I'm going to be using still the example of online video platform, and we're going to start it together and hopefully deliver something useful towards the end of it. So I always start my projects with a discovery phase. The discovery phase is when I sit down with my solution architect, the rest of the team, and the client in one room, and we're trying to have a conversation around what are the exact requirements for the client. What do they want us to build? Sometimes the problem is we get into the room with only developers from the client side, and they tell us what they want technically to be delivered. However, once the code is ready, we deliver it, then they get it, and they say, oh, well, the business people are saying that the feature should be working in a different way. So, right, here's the problem. So I always try to invite both the business guys and the technical guys into the meeting, and we then start talking about the requirements. Now, the requirements are to help you answer the question: what you're going to build, what problem you're going to solve, how people are going to use the functionality, and this is not how you're going to develop, because that's up to you and you know how to do it. It's about how people are going to be using your system, and then at the end, who is going to be using this system. So you put yourself in the frame of mind of the end user, right? Requirements, never assume assume, make sure that the client owns the requirements. I don't leave the room without asking the client to write the requirements for me, right? We don't want to do it for the clients. We want to make sure that they are aware of the of what they ask for, and later we're not going to have this funny conversation where we delivered something for them and they're saying this is not quite what they were asking for. And now the final bit, super important, acceptance criteria. If you've got your requirements, your acceptance criteria is basically the way for you to test your requirement, right? So if you think about the Jira workflow, the acceptance criteria might be a subtask of your requirement type of tickets. But the purpose of the discovery session with the client, which in my case lasts about 6 weeks at the beginning of the project, is to make sure that we leave the discovery with a complete list of requirements and acceptance criteria, which are basically for the client to test if all the boxes can be ticked. Now, the format of those is very much around Agile. I'm sure this is something some of you might be familiar with. As someone, I want to do something so that I'm going to get the benefit, right? This is how we write our requirements. In Scrum, that would be the user story. We just call them requirements. It's basically the same thing, right? So, thinking about this format, you can see that this is very much a business-centric rather than technical-centric. You think like a user. If I'm a video editor, so as a video editor, I want to have 5 buttons so that I can choose which mobile application I'm going to push my video to, right? That would be an example of the requirements. Now, having this requirement then allows me to proceed to acceptance criteria, where for a given scenario, if I do this, then I've got a result and I can test it. Does it make sense? Does it work? Yes, it does. If not, then we reiterate, take the code back. How does this work in Jira? Here is our workflow, right? That's literally the way that our requirements ticket would have to go to finally reach the complete point at the end. So first of all, draft. You want your clients to write the draft, as I mentioned. We're not going to do it for the clients. We expect them to think about what we should deliver for them and then put that requirement in writing. It's going to come to you and it needs your approval. The reason for doing this is because we want to make sure that it makes sense what the client is asking for, and we can actually technically deliver it. Because sometimes they ask you to send the guy to the moon, but that's not really what we do. It might be quite difficult. So you accept the requirements. You then proceed to the next step where you put an estimation on your requirements. And this means I tell my client that's going to cost you 20 story points. You pay $2,000 per story point. You can calculate how much you need to pay for that feature. Do you want it? Yes, I do. Then we go into estimated. If not, then obviously we need to have a separate conversation around this. And once it's estimated, I put it in the backlog. Once I put it into my sprint plan, it's pending development for that sprint to start. When I start, it's going to be in development. Once I finish my development, it's going to be ready for acceptance, and either client accepts it and we're all happy, or the client rejects it, and then we need to take a step back and develop again. Here is just a step to demonstrate that we work in a staging environment and then we deploy in production environment. So here is just waiting for production deployment, and then we complete our feature, let's say. So on the board, here's an example. I basically find it easier when I put all the columns in the Jira setup according to the workflow for the ticket. Here's just an example of where we are with one of the projects. This allows me to then share the link with the client and show the client where we are within the project, right? So we finished 31 requirements. We've got a few other ones, but in general, we're tracking pretty okay. We're going to be on time with delivering that bit. Final bit on the discovery before I proceed to tell you about what happens after discovery is around the epics. Here's a quite good practice that I find quite useful in terms of how we use the epics. So epics is not a container for us. Epic is something that starts and ends with a bunch of story points in it. So it's all about having a defined scope. I've seen many Agile teams working in a way that they just keep the epics open, and the epic is just, some kind of a theme name that they put around a bunch of stories that would drive, some front-end features. What I prefer to do is to have that defined, and if my epic is going to be, 9 stories, Then after 9 stories, I'm going to close that epic. So another thing to mention here is that the epic is going to contain not only my issues, so your user stories, but I also put my requirements, other related tasks into the epic. So that if the client asks me, what are you guys working on right now? I can show him, hey, I've got that requirement. You asked us to write an ingest script for your video so you can ingest from a number of different locations. Okay, this is fine. And in order to get to that point, I need to finish all those issues that sit in the single epic. Then the client take a look and they know exactly what we're going to be working on in this sprint or next sprint. So it's just quite handy. And the final thing about the epic is that once we know that we're going to be scheduling for this sprint, this is when I put the start and end time frame. So again, it's one method for letting your clients know when something's going to get delivered. But at the same time, having this in Jira in this case allows you to measure your velocity, so you know how much time you prepared for that and whether you've actually done it on time or maybe so you know you save some story points. In terms of the workflow for the epics, that's very simple. We don't overcomplicate things here. Epic can be either open or it can be closed. We don't really proceed through all those different steps. I don't see the need in it. So I've done my epics, and I can proceed to sprint planning exercise, right? So before every sprint, I need to decide what we're going to be working on within that sprint. The first principle is around your P1s, P2s, P3s. So if I think about the video platform as an example, the must-have, which is my P1, is going to be, say, I need to be able to upload video, transcode that video, so it's going to be playable on Android, right? This is must-have. Without this, the system is not going to work. Should-have would be, I want this video to be available in a number of different formats, right? So I can have a good quality, medium quality, bad quality, depending on the bandwidth you've got available for your device. And nice-to-have would be great if the client would be able to choose the right quality, right? If they prefer to spend a bit more time on the buffer, but get the better quality, we can also deliver that. This then allows me to group all my tasks, all my stories, and put some priorities on those stories. And that's what I would do with that. I would spend about 60% of the sprint for the P1s, so number 1 priorities. I've spent around 30% of my P2s and 10% for my P3s. The reason for doing this is that within the sprint, I always must get all my P1 sorted. Without that, we're not going to deliver the project on time. If we do have enough time, it's great if we're going to take a few boxes around the should-haves, and if we're super fast within that sprint, we might even get some nice-to-haves done in that sprint. Another thing is the principle of 100, 70, and 50. When I plan my sprint 1, I need to know in 100% what I'm going to be doing in that sprint. But in order to avoid having questions from the client, hey guys, when are you going to be working on this or that feature, I try to start planning ahead, and I put roughly 75% certainty into my upcoming sprint. So my sprint 1 is sorted, I've got my stories, and I know exactly what I'm going to be working on. My sprint 2 is planned in 75%, and my sprint 3 is planned in 50%. I can always change the order of the stories later, but this allows me to keep the client informed about what's going to be happening later in the following sprints. And the final super important bit is around contingency. So say you've got your sprint which is going to last 20 story points, right? It doesn't matter how you calculate it, say 20 story points. I'm going to reserve about 20 to 30% for my escalation. And these are the bugs, and these are the changes. At the beginning, you're not going to have that many bugs, so it's not a problem, right? But towards the end, you're going to be delivering less and less P1s, but this is when the bugs are going to be becoming a bit more painful. So start increasing that contingency buckets towards the end of your project. That's going to save you lots of time later. The way we manage our tasks, that's again very simple. We open the task, it's in progress, then it needs approval, and need approval means I need to have another engineer from my team to review and approve the code written by another guy. Sometimes we put the task into the post state, and that means that they might be blocked by, say, the client. They haven't delivered something, so I can't proceed. And it's a fantastic method of showing the clients, hey, we are waiting for you. I can't do any further work because we're waiting for you. And that's a good illustration of doing that. Obviously, once you finish, you then proceed to the closure. Here is a quick example, which again gives you the column. Everything moves automatically when you change status from A to B. Very quickly around the stand-up meetings and how we run them. There are so many different schools around how to do it. I'll tell you a bit more about how we do it. So the cadence is daily, timing is the morning. There's not the first thing in the morning. I let the guys check their emails to see if maybe something has happened overnight. They come then better prepared for the sprint meeting. And the format is as follows. It differs slightly to what's been described in the books around the Agile development. I've been testing a number of different methods. This is something that works pretty well for us. So we group together, and at the beginning I start by highlighting the high priorities for today and for tomorrow for the team. Then we do the run-robin exercise, so individual review of the tickets, right? What have you done yesterday? Did you have any blockers? What's your plan for today? And do you see any blockers coming up? And if there are the blockers that we can anticipate for, to make sure that they will be able to deliver. Now, I always close the meeting with the general announcements. My team are missing the client meeting, so every morning I need to tell them, hey guys, there's the client online at 2:30, be in the office, right? It's just a quick thing of keeping them on their toes. Right, so we've run our sprints, we've delivered all the features that we were asked for, and now we are ready to proceed to the deployment. So a few things around the deployments. First, we need to make sure that the code is ready, so run all your unit tests and regression tests. Make sure it's peer-reviewed, and make sure that you use the single branch rather than keep all the different forks in your GitHub. Change control, super important. We don't push anything into production without letting other people know. So we would normally work with some other vendors, they might be doing the front-end stuff. We wouldn't just go ahead and do the deployment because it may interfere with what they're doing. So we try to let them know about that. By the way, have the rollback plan. So if you know you're deploying something, make sure that you know how to take it back from the platform in case there is a bug. And so the deployments, there's the rule, we only do those between Monday and Wednesday. If it's Thursday or Friday, it's too late, because if there's a bug, you're going to struggle over the weekend, you don't want to do that. Very quick final point, risk management is a big pain in the ass for many, but I think it is really important for you to remember about that. And I use a simple Jira board for this. I've got my different columns, and the reason for doing this is because I can show this to the clients, and sometimes I can assign the risk to the client because they're asking me to do something risky. So I highlight this to them, hey, it didn't work because you were asking me for this, and it was your decision. And just to wrap up, some tips and tricks, recommendations. DIY, do it yourself. If you've got your tool set and your methods, use them, don't use clients' way of managing the projects. You are there to bring the client into your mix. Educate your client in terms of how your workflow works. This is going to save you time on answering the questions from the clients. Make sure you keep the client updated, so you communicate to the client. Make sure that you provide the client with the reports, where we are, where we should be, according to the initial plan, and try to listen to their feedback, so you can improve your own operations. In terms of the lower level recommendations, estimations, don't forget about the FAT. We actually call it FAT. The developers are optimists. So if I ask my solution architect how long it's going to take us to deliver this, they're always going to say it's going to be 1 day. If he tells me 1 day, then I tell the client it's going to be 3 days, right? Always the case. Velocity, keep measuring it so you know how you can plan a bit better moving forwards. Vendors, ecosystem, you're not going to be working on a project yourself, there are going to be some other vendors as well. So make sure you don't work in silos, but say you share a single Jira board. It's going to be much easier for you to manage that. 1 minute, and I think it's going to be perfect time for us to move to the QA at this point. I'm more than happy to answer some of your questions. If I don't know, I don't know, and I apologize for that, but I'll try to give it a chance. So, over to you guys. Any questions around projects?
Thank you for your lesson. Actually, we have about 5 or 10 minutes for questions.
Lovely.
Do you have any experience with stopping sprints?
Finishing sprints or stopping?
Stopping when you do not finish the sprint.
Yeah. So okay, so we've got the sprint is going to last for 2 weeks, and I haven't done all my stories, right? That's what you're saying. Yeah, it's a common practice, and I think many teams do it at the beginning, especially when the team groups together. You don't really know how quick people are going to be working, and after doing this job for a few years, I'm trying to be very, very conservative when I plan my initial sprints, right? Say I want to, and they're telling me, the guys in the room are telling me, we will be able to finish those 10 stories in one sprint. I would go for 5 or 6, right? If they're going to finish on time, they can always pick something back from the backlog, right? It's not a problem. But if you don't, then it looks horrible for the client, and it changes all the rest of the plan. So if the sprint is going to be only around 3 stories, and it looks a bit shaky for the client, go for 3. Don't go for more. Over time, when you learn how your team operates and how they work together, this will become a bit more optimistic around the planning. But the one rule not to break is to have a situation when you finish your sprint and you've got 5 stories still left, unattended. Just don't do it. Go for less, but deliver. That's always going to work better. Cheers.
And just one question. You've told that the developers are optimistic and their estimates are optimistic too. For example, if I'm a developer and I'm sure that my task will take about an hour, what's the better rate for planning for time management to estimate my task? Have you got my question?
Yeah, it's a funny one. Yeah, it's an interesting one, right?
1 per 2, 1 per 3. You've told us as an example about usual plans. 1 day, and fact was 3 days.
So at the beginning of the project, I would double things. If I get an estimate for 2 days, I put 4 days for that. And it's not because my developer is just a bit hangover this morning, is going to be working slower. No, it's not the case. There are some issues that the developer may not be aware of, right? We might be waiting for something from another vendor, from another development team, and I can only address that once I have that little piece. My developer assumes that I've got everything needed for me to pursue. So at the beginning of the project, I would say, let's double the estimations. Towards, once you start working with the team and get to know the guys a bit better, you can go a bit lower than this, right? So if you, at the beginning of the project, 2 means 4, towards the end of the project, 2 might even mean 2.5, right? That's the good mate. But it's really difficult to figure out that, especially at the beginning. So I would take the conservative step, because then you avoid the situation where the client is just calling you and shouting about where's my stuff, what do I pay you for? That happens.
For initial doubling is okay.
Yeah, and I would say that it might even be seen as the common practice in the industry, right? So don't be afraid of telling the clients that something is going to cost $10,000, because you know how much it's going to cost you in terms of money, in terms of time, and if that's the figure, that's the figure. Don't go for any lower, because then you're going to lose the money.
What do you think is the best timing for daily stand-ups and for retrospectives?
Okay, so daily stand-ups, in a number of different Agile books, people say do it first thing in the morning, right? Get everyone, let them have a coffee and do this first thing in the morning. I don't agree with that. I'd say when we start work at 9, we normally run the stand-up at 10. And the reason for this is that it allows me to go through my Slack channels, it allows me to go through my emails. There might be something that is super important, I want to tell the guys about that. So if I do my sprints first thing in the morning, then later I have to chase them and keep telling them about stuff that I found in the emails. It also allows them to go get to the room, sit down, see what they've reflect on what they've done yesterday, and then start preparing for the sprint, for the stand-up meeting. So I would always give some time to the people. Don't necessarily need to do it first thing in the morning. Other teams work differently, and that's absolutely fine. Whatever is the team dynamics, and whatever is gonna work okay for you and for your colleagues. In terms of the retrospectives, your sprint might be ending on Friday. Don't do retrospective on Friday because people have fried brains by that point, right? Let them sing over the weekend, like we sing the code, and have it on Monday. We do it middays, but it doesn't really matter at this point. It allows people to kind of forget about the project, come with a fresh mind, and then start thinking about what's going well, what hasn't gone well, and they start coming up with the ideas. I forgot about that, but let me tell you now, we had that issue. This is how we should solve it for the next sprint. So up to you, and here are just the personal experiences from what I've been dealing with.
Thank you. And what about timing? 1 hour for retro and 10-15 minutes for stand-up? Obviously 15 minutes for the stand-up, you don't go any longer. If there is something that you need to discuss during the stand-up meetings and you are exceeding 15 minutes, it's probably the reason where it's probably because it's something that requires a bit longer conversation, right? So discover during stand-ups what you want to be talking about later and book a separate dedicated session, because if someone has a problem with what they're doing, and if they're going to start describing the problem to you, others are going to get bored. And I see my team, checking the phones or checking their smartwatches and stuff like that. I don't want it. I want them to focus on what we're talking about in this in this stand-up. And if there's an issue, we need to talk for a bit longer. We do it later. What was the second bit? It was the good time for the retrospective, you asked me. Yeah.
Right. No one wants to do retrospectives in terms of my development team, so I keep it to half an hour. It's really just to sit down and throw things at me. I take notes, and then I kind of send them the update on Slack. This is what we've done wrong in this sprint. Next sprint, let's try to do this, this, and this. If I do retrospectives with the client, book 1 hour, because they're going to come a bit late. They're going to be asking you questions. They're going to be talking about something completely unrelated, or they're going to be talking about the upcoming sprint, right? So they're going to waste your time. So book one hour for the meeting with the client. Internally, 20-30 minutes works pretty well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One question, please.
Please.
We have two types of sprints in our project. So one of it is technical sprint, and another is business sprint. So it continues one after another. So the release frequency is about 1.5 months or 2 months. What do you think about this situation? Is it better, good for business?
That's going to depend on the business you run. To be fair with you, I haven't come across this method myself in the past, where you've got business sprint and you've got your technical sprints. That's a new thing for me. I wouldn't say it's wrong or it's against the Agile, because I also don't follow the book on the Agile or on Scrum and do everything as the book states, because the book is wrong. And you figure this out, I'm sure you've done yourself before. Now, if I think about that, I would really need to analyze the use case for running the business sprint versus technical sprints. But I don't see anything wrong with that, right? If that's something that's going to help your business, go ahead and do it. One thing that I would possibly want to point out is that 1.5 month for a sprint, it sounds a bit long, right? And this is where, for me as a project manager, it would be extremely difficult to plan that sprint well, right? The aim is to deliver 100% of your stories. I know how many stories can be delivered in 1 week's time or 2 weeks' time. Now, month and a half, how many are you going to deliver? 60, 70, maybe 40. That's going to be tricky. And I'm sure there's a way of cutting the sprints into shorter periods of time. But again, every business is going to be a bit different. Now, one thing that just came to my mind now, let's say someone got sick right in the middle of a sprint, what do you do then? Their story is not going to get finished. I'll have to think about that. It's an interesting question, but something for you to think about too. Any other questions?
У нас, к сожалению, закончилось время на вопросы, поэтому
желающие, кто не успел спросить, найдите Саймона Шима в кулуарах, и он будет с радостью на все отвечать.
I think I understood. I'm more than welcome to speak to you guys later, so just grab me. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.